Alright guys, so in this lesson I wanted to go through another technique that I use quite a bit. Actually, it's probably the one I used the most during my self-study challenge like a year and a half ago. But there's a lot of nuances that, are important to take into account that I didn't take into account that I wish I would have known, and I know now. So this technique really is you could classify it as a retrieval as well as an information processing technique for what we'll look at in a second, but it serves both purposes. And it's called self-explanation. So really, like, I think a way to think about it is explanations about a topic, concept, problem, or section that are generated by you, and they're typically something that you're confused about, something that you don't quite get. So those are really the characteristics of what it is. Let me actually get through why it's pretty important. So, okay, so really, I think it's like really three main reasons, I'd say. Retention. So again, just general retrieval improves retention. It's great for finding gaps. So I'd say that's the main, you could say, problem that self-explanations solve. When and there are a few caveats to actually using this in a way that allows you to find gaps and that kind of stuff that we'll look at in a sec. But it's great for finding gaps. So if you find yourself confused on something, generating a self-explanation in the way that I'm about to show you is extremely helpful. So the other thing is it clears up and improves current understanding. And again, you have to apply it in the right way for it to do that. But if you explain things in your own words, and this is kind of where the information processing part of things come into play, because by explaining in your own words and going through the nuances and steps, you're able to go from, okay, I kind of understand this, to, oh, now I really get how everything fits in together and connects. So that's that. But there are a few caveats that I want to look into before I walk you through how I typically go do it. So the first is that it's quite time consuming. So you want to apply it selectively. It's one of those things where you have to really think, well, is this an important enough of a concept, subject, idea, and how well do I understand it? So unlike other retrieval techniques like flashcards or brain dump / free recall, it does take quite some time, but it is really good for finding gaps. And the reason pretty much why it's good for finding gaps, and we'll see it kind of like in the next section, is that there's a specific way to do it that allows for it. So the basic idea, the reason why it's so useful is because for finding gaps is because if you do it in the right way, which we'll look at in a sec, invariably when you're going through and you don't understand something, you're going to get like stuck, right? If you're able to be specific enough and break it down and explain each and every component enough. If you're going through it and you find yourself stuck, oh, that's like a clear indication that this is where I need to be looking further to, read some more about it, etc., so that I can fill in that gap. So the other caveat is that and there's like several research papers on this, that trading self-explanation opportunities for practice problems, or that you shouldn't trade opportunities to do practice problems for self-explanations. There are a few reasons for that. If your goal is to do practice problems, self-explanations only cover you could say, a portion of what's required to successfully complete the problem. But doing practice problems completes everything. It gives you all the, if you were able to solve that problem, that means that you know what's needed to solve those kinds of problems. But if you can generate a self-explanation, that doesn't necessarily mean you can solve the problem. That's probably the main reason. The other thing is that sometimes when you're doing practice problems, you get these like specific nuanced insights that come from experiencing the process of actually solving it, that are kind of hard to gauge when it comes to self-explanations. So that's kind of another reason for it. But they are probably, again, the main reason why I would use them is finding gaps, and still they do clear up, understanding. So let's actually get into how you would make like a pretty good self-explanation. So these are a few like principles. And so the first one that I kind of like hinted at was being specific and going tight. So a lot of the issues, pretty much like, if you don't do this, the self-explanation is pretty worthless, because if you only go at a high-level overview of things, you might think that you understand it, but you only understand the high-level overview. When you're doing a self-explanation, you want to go from each and every step and make sure you don't miss anything, because that's where it's going to be able to pinpoint exactly where the confusion is. Because in the other case, you might just be, okay, I'm confused, but I'm not sure where I'm confused. But by being more specific, you're able to narrow down on where the confusion is. Or you might just go general and think, oh, I actually understand it. And only when you go specific, you're able to realize where you miss a gap. So either you don't understand something and you're unsure of where the gap is, and being specific in your explanation, making sure you go through each and every step in between allows you to be more specific of where that confusion lies. Or you might think you understand it because you have a general gist of it, but you actually don't really understand it as well. And that's going to be uncovered here as well. Now, when it comes to kind of the information processing side of why self-explanations are useful, like in terms of improving your current understanding, there are a few things I like to do with them. So I challenge myself to make the explanation concise, simple, and intuitive. These are pretty much 3 questions that I ask myself as I'm going through it, just to prompt my mind. Well, how can I make this shorter, more concise? How can I make this simpler in simpler language, and how can I make it more intuitive? That's going to allow me to process information at a deeper level. And the other thing is that another thing that I do with self-explanations is that I'll have maybe a Google Doc or something where I store them. And then every now and then, as I'm accumulating more insights in whatever I'm studying, I'll revisit with a new primed, you could say with new knowledge and new ideas, and try and improve my previous self-explanation by incorporating new ideas and perspectives. So that's also another way in which you can process it as at a deep level, is going back and improving your self-explanations the more you know. So that's pretty much it for self-explanations. They're a really useful really useful technique that I used a ton during my challenge, but I didn't use it as effectively as this. I would say if I were, you know, I was probably using it the most for clearing up and improving current understanding. But some mistakes I did make was I wasn't going specific enough. It was pretty general. If I were to do it again, I'd probably, again, make sure I go through every step, maybe try and generate examples and things like that, analogies, those kinds of things, to further see, okay, well, do I really understand this, right? And also, I didn't use it as much for finding gaps, which I was mostly using it for things I already felt were pretty familiar, which was kind of a mistake because probably the most useful thing for it is for concepts that are either you don't feel as confident in, or concepts that you feel confused about. So it's like something, okay, I kind of understand this, let me improve my understanding, or I feel confused about this, let me like get an explanation to see where I'm missing things, or let me generate an explanation to see where exactly I'm missing out on. So that's pretty much it for this lesson, and see you guys in the next ones.